Alhamdulillah, ahmaduhu wasta'inuhu wasta'dihi wa ashhadu an la ilaha illallah wahdahu la sharika lah wa ashhadu anna Muhammadan abduhu wa rasuluh. Amma ba'd. Dear brothers and sisters, thank you for asking me to come up again. I want to thank the Imam, Imam Salim, for having me back. Last time I came was about a year ago. Alhamdulillah, it was a very pleasant experience, and hopefully I can say something that will not only be pleasing to the ear, but inshallah something that will be pleasing to the heart as well. And I remember reading about Maulana Hakim Mahtur, and he said that when it comes to knowledge is not passed from book to student. It is not passed from mouth to the heart, but rather it goes from heart to heart. So it is very important that whatever words that we speak, that we choose them with a good intention, and that intention is that it affects your hearts. And inshallah, hopefully they might be. The other thing is that they're also pleasing to the ear. So inshallah. I want to begin by a little bit of introduction about myself. And the reason why I chose this topic, the topic is Muslim identity. And this topic directly affects me as a person. I came here when I was about 5 or 6 years old. I came to America very young from Pakistan, at a time when we didn't have a lot of Muslims. Neither in the media, we didn't have them on the streets. In fact, I was just telling the brothers earlier that I remember a time when there was one masjid in all of Northern California. My grandfather and his brother, they came to America in 1939. They remember building that masjid. And I remember them telling us, they used to tell us stories that people from as far as Houston, Texas, and Seattle, Washington would come for Eid to Sacramento to the V Street Masjid because it was the only masjid this side of the Mississippi. So now when I came, it was the only masjid in Northern California. So growing up in an environment where you don't have people that either look like you, speak your language, have your name, or any other aspect of what we consider identity. They share none of this. You're a complete alien in this culture. So growing up in that culture, I mean, there's going to be some psychological effects. You're going to get picked on as a kid. My father and them, they came when they were a little bit older. They didn't experience elementary school, middle school, and high school. They didn't go through what we went through. So when they came, they had a Muslim identity that was already ingrained in them, right? So when they got picked on, they were much older. They had the coping mechanisms to deal with that. And they were comfortable in their own skin. They were comfortable being Pakistani, right? Well, as a little kid growing up, you just want to fit in. The last thing you want is somebody to remind you that your culture, your name, your religion, the color of your skin, everything about you repulses us. Tell that to a 7, 8, 9-year-old kid, right? That you repulse us. And to a kid, kids are very sensitive. You know, sometimes grown-ups, we tend to have this attitude that we know it all. And that kids, just do what I say. Be quiet and just do what I say. You're not smart enough to think on your own. Kids are very perceptive. Very perceptive. I remember studying psychology, and in psychology they told us that depending on the years of adolescent development, kids actually go through this neurological phenomenon called exuberance, where the brain is at such a level, at a heightened level, it picks up everything. There's a reason why their eyes are like this big when they're young. They see everything. They record everything. And sometimes it's not what you say, it's how you look at them, or how you don't look at them. It registers. And there's another phenomenon, right? There's another phenomenon. When a kid experiences something that either hurts them or makes them happy, dopamine is released. And that feeling that they felt at that moment, the dopamine crystallizes that feeling. And it will be with them for the rest of their life. You can study it. A lot of scientific research went into this. So there's an old saying. Maya Angelou, she, the poet laureate of America, she made this very famous little couplet poem. And she said that it's not what you say, right? But it's how you make a person feel that they will remember for the rest of their life. It's not what you say, but it's how you made them feel when you said it. Because that feeling is what gets crystallized, and it stays with you for the rest of your life. Now, why is this important? When the things that you hold more sacred than anything else, your religion, your national identity, your name, the color of your skin, the facial features that identify you as a specific race, when those things are being picked on, right? Then you get these feelings. As a kid, you don't want to deal with that. Nobody, I didn't know what crystallized and dopamine was when I was 6 years old. Neurological science, I couldn't even spell neurological, right? So, I did not have neither the understanding nor the wherewithal to deal with that. I did not have the coping mechanisms to deal with this. So my brain did something else, which it happens to all kids. The brain goes into default mode. Like with anything, right? Like with computers, you make certain mistakes and the computer is like, this dummy does not know how to operate me. Let me just go back to plan B, which is default, and it just overrides you because you don't know what you're doing, right? Machines do that, computers do that, the brain does that too. The brain is a giant computer. You don't have the wherewithal to deal with the trauma that's coming from you being picked on, so the brain takes that trauma, those hard feelings, it takes those. And I can't deal with this. I'm sorry, I can't deal with this. So I'll tell you what I'm going to do. It wraps it up. Nice little candy coating, like an M&M, right? And it puts it in the back of the head. I can't deal with this. I'm sorry. I'm not going to deal with it. The default mode, I'm not going to deal with this. I don't have the wherewithal. But you, at some point in life, when you grow up, when you develop the self-help and the social mechanisms to deal with this, you deal with it. But right now, I'm putting it in the back. Trauma don't sit there quietly, though. Trauma affects everything in a kid's life. It does not sit there quietly. Yeah, they're not going to tell you as a parent. Rule number one, I don't have kids. I just got married just a few months ago. We'll get into that, why I waited so long. We'll get into that a little bit later. So I don't have kids. But I can tell you, parents, for sure, you'll be the last one to find out when your kid's in trouble. If I could write that in stone for you, I would write that in stone for you. Why? With trauma comes guilt and shame. This is not me saying, this is science. I studied psychology for years. I'm actually just about a year away from a PhD right now. With trauma comes shame. The last person that a kid wants to feel shame from is their parents, specifically the father. Why? Because they're afraid. Like if I tell dad, what's going to happen? Not that dad's going to slap me. No. Not that dad's going to yell at me. No. But then he'll look at me. He'll look down. That'll kill a kid. That'll kill him. I remember reading a hadith one time where one of the Sahaba, he said that he had done something and the Prophet just looked at him, sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, he just looked at him and he said, I wish he had just killed me. I wish he had just taken the knife and chopped my head off. That look destroyed me. Why? Because it's like, you let me down. Parents, a lot of times, I don't want to just pick on parents, grown-ups. I'll pick on grown-ups. How about that? We pick on grown-ups today. Grown-ups have this habit of making kids, when they do something wrong, feel like, you just let me down. You're worthless. Without even saying it. So it's very important to understand why kids don't come to us right away. I didn't. I did not go to my parents when I was getting picked on. What I did was internalize all that pain. And the brain did one other thing. It wants to get away from that pain. So what does the brain do when it wants to get away from the pain? If you can't beat them, join them. If you can't beat them, join them. If they're picking on you for wearing one of these, don't wear it. If they're picking on you for looking a certain way, don't look that way. If they're picking on you for your name, change your name and go by a different name. If they're picking on you for X, do Y. That's the way kids work. It's just the reality. Now, I just chose a really bad route. You know, I think I probably could have picked a much better route. I ended up joining a gang. I ended up doing a lot of bad things. I ended up going to prison. And I spent a total of 21 years in prison for the stuff that I was doing. I was 17 years old when I went to prison. So most of my life was in prison, actually. I'm 43 right now. And, I mean, you can do the math. That's just like the majority of my life has been in prison. And in fact, one of the things that came out of that was I was able to keep my youth in prison, in the sense that my youthful outlook on life, I was able to keep that. I didn't have to pay taxes and bills and do homework and all this stuff that, you know, have kids running around and you worried about them all the time. So I guess I kept my mind young. You know, I know that's hard. I'm going to find out eventually. That's why I didn't get married. I just got out of prison like 2.5 years ago. So alhamdulillah, I went back to Pakistan and got married recently. But prison, I want to start at that point. There's a point in my life when I find out that I've been living a really corrupt life. And the reason why I had been living this corrupt life is I was running from something. What was I running from? I was running from my own Muslim identity. I was ashamed of my Muslim identity. At that time, there weren't a lot of Muslims, like I said. And at that time, there were a lot of people that were coming to America and going through the same things that I was going through. And all of them, I shouldn't say all, a large percentage of them, right, kind of fell in that same hole that I fell into, where they either joined gangs, went to drugs, or were involved in many things. Why? Because they assimilated to the people that were around them. That's just how it happened. Now, I'm in prison. I go to solitary confinement for getting into a fight. In solitary confinement, this is in San Quentin. When you go to solitary confinement and they put you in the cell, the guys, this solitary, you cannot see the people. You have a wall in front of you. They know that they hear the guards with their keys ringing, so they know they just put a guy on the 5th floor in a cell. So they want to know who this guy is. So the question they asked me is the same question that I heard for years and years later. They ask everybody the same question. Hey, you, cell 504. I was in cell 504. I still remember the cell. You, listen to this. Hey, you, cell 504. Not hey, you in cell 504. We're going to do some critical thinking on this question. Hey, you, cell 504. You're a number. Hey, you, cell 504. That's what they asked, right? The next question they ask you, what are you? What are you? Because they need to know if you're one of the 5 or 6 gangs that control the prison. They need to know your identity. And at that point, it's like, wow, that's so profound. I'm sitting there like philosophizing. I was like, that is a very profound question. How do I answer this question? Hey, you, answer the question. So I was like, man, that's a tough question. What am I? Am I this guy from this Mexican gang? Or am I Sajad Shakoor from Pakistan, a Muslim? How do I answer that? Because how you answer that is going to affect how you get treated the rest of your time. And I had a life sentence. I knew I was going to be in prison. Actually, I would have been in prison for the rest of my entire life. I was never supposed to get out of prison. But alhamdulillah, Allah intervened after all these years and made it possible for me to get out of prison. But I remember that question that they asked. It's a profound question. We get asked a question. It's like when they say when you're in the grave, they ask you a certain question, and the way you answer, you can't script that answer. It's not like I'm gonna go to the grave with a little cheat sheet in my hand on my little iPhone, and it's gonna be like scroll down to when they ask question A, the answer is yeah, okay, this is the. It doesn't work like that. When you ask that question, you give the answer that's in your heart. The answer that comes to you when the angels ask the question, Ma Rabbuk. The answer that comes to you is that answer that when you died, that was on your heart. That was on your heart. So anyway, man, I sat there for a while. I didn't answer that question because I was confused. It never hit me that way. I think solitary confinement, and by the way, I wish I could point the camera to just show you this area, but solitary confinement was about this wide and a little bit longer than this, 8 feet long, 21 years in there, in this little cubbyhole. And I'm sitting there like, how do I answer this question? You know? And the answer I gave eventually was, at some point I realized, I'm a Muslim. This is who I am. I'm from Pakistan. This is who I am. And this is who I'm going to be. And if you don't like it, you can come see me. We can handle it. I'm still a gangster. I didn't stop being a gangster for the record. I still knew how to fight, and I still knew how to do everything else. I just chose to fight for a different cause. That's all I did. So I was like, I'm a Muslim. And the next question was, who you run with? Man, I'm a Muslim, man. You got anything to say about that, I'm in 504. And that's how it's going to be. Like, all right, Holmes. All right. That's how it ended. It was like a level of respect. Like, this guy is, okay, he's serious about his business. Now, why am I telling you this? For me to get to that point of recognizing my Muslim identity, it didn't happen overnight. It took a lot of introspection. I had to come to terms with what is identity? And that's what I want to speak on. What is identity? I want to say that there's a difference between what is Muslim identity and what is cultural identity. These are two distinct things. We can be Muslim, right? And I know I hear this all the time. Oh, he doesn't dress like a Muslim. You know, like people will look at me today and like, man, he don't dress like no Muslim. What kind of Muslim is he? Well, what does a Muslim dress like? I'm wearing pants, right? Let's look at the etymology of the word pants. Pants comes from the Spanish word pantalones. Pantalones comes from the Arabic word because obviously Muslims were in Spain for 800 years, so some of that rubbed off. It comes from the Arabic word bantalon. Prophet Muhammad ﷺ wore pants. He didn't wear Levi's, but he wore pants. The requirement in the Sharia is very clear. We know what our aura is. We know what the limitations are. We know those. As long as you're within those limitations, right? And somebody says, well, brother, you're not dressed like a Muslim. Well, what does a Muslim dress like? The Muslim dresses according to the Quran and the Sunnah. You fulfill the requirements of the Quran and the Sunnah first. It does not mean that I wear salwar kameez. I like salwar kameez. I ain't gonna lie to you, I love salwar kameez. But it's not always practical for me to wear salwar kameez. It just isn't. So I wear according to what Allah and His Prophet ﷺ have prescribed. Now, I'm bringing that up because we sometimes think that what we wear in our culture, what defines us as our culture, is also definitive of Islam. Not always the case. What we wear in Pakistan may not be acceptable in other parts of the world by Muslims. They'll say he's not dressed like a Muslim. Why? Because I'm not wearing a thobe. You go to Africa, they wear tunics. Even the shuyukh of Africa wear tunics. You go to Pakistan and they're going to tell you in Urdu, "Arey bhai, ye bahut chota hai. This is like really short, brother." You know, I can see your forearms, brother. Namaz kaise padh sakte? You know, it's like, how can you pray like this? But these are shuyukh. And they will tell you, brother, no, this is acceptable. So my point is that we need to understand the distinction between what is cultural identity, what identifies us as our culture, and what is Islamic identity. There's a very significant distinction here. So anyway, first and foremost, understanding why we need Muslim identity, especially for the youth. I remember one of my teachers told us this story. He said that when he had finished his alim course in India, then he was on his last year for his mufti course. And the ustad of the madrasa had posed a question. And he says, I want everyone to research this question. Bring me your dalil on this question, and on this masla. The question was this: are small children, very small children, are they permitted in the masjid? So he said all the ulama that were in that room came with the same dalil. Absolutely not. There's a hadith on that as very clear as day and night. Majnoon and very small children, very small, and small, like, I mean, they're just not able to control their bodily functions, and they need the mother to care for them at all times. Those very small kids. So anyway, everyone said, no, absolutely not. He said, yes. In fact, the answer is yes, they can come to the masjid, but he said, I will go one step further and say not only can they come to the masjid, but it is highly recommended that we bring them to the masjid. So he said, the ustad looked at him and said, you do understand you're going against this hadith? And he says, no, but actually I'm not. And he says, well, bring your dalil, bring your proofs. And he says, here's my proofs. He says, I came to America, stayed here for 6 months. I don't know which city, but I know it was somewhere in California. He said, I stayed here for 6 months, and then I went back to India. He said that while I was in America, I noticed that we didn't have any youth in the masjid. He said there were no youth. He says, you go to India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, Afghanistan, all those countries, any Muslim country you go to is full of little kids, full of teenagers. He says, in America, I didn't see that. I saw a bunch of old men. And he said that what I sat and looked at was, what is causing this? Because obviously, you cannot sustain a Muslim community with just old men. It does not happen. You need youth. You need youth to help build and be the next generation. The very first, I'll digress for just 1 second on this point. The very first masajid in America were on the East Coast, specifically in Ohio. They were built by Turks and Syrians during the First World War. They're gone. Every single one of those masjid is either torn down, turned into a bingo hall, church, or everything you can imagine. The oldest continuously existing masjid that was built as a purpose-filled masjid from day one is right there in Sacramento on V Street. It is the only one. You can research it all you want. That never stopped being a masjid, that had one salat at least every single day for the past 80, 90 years. That's the only masjid in America that qualifies for that distinction. Why? Those masajid lost their youth. You cannot maintain a community with old men. It is, I'm sorry, brothers. I got a lot of gray hair too. And I hate saying that, but it's the reality. It is the reality. We need the youth. Now, so he says to his teacher, he says, yes, I am in line with this hadith. And he says, prove it. And he says, this hadith is saying, don't bring little kids. But in America, because you don't bring little kids, because you don't involve them in the masjid, they don't get to see Islam every day. They can't come out of the house and run into everyone on the street being a Muslim. They don't go to school and everybody's named Muhammad. They don't turn on the TV and see their culture. They're inundated with everything that is against Islam or not representative of Islam. The masjid is the only place where they can see a communal life in Islam outside of their house. It's the only place. Let's get that straight. The only place in America outside of a kid's house where he can see Islam in communal settings is in the masjid. So he said, I told my ustad that there is a principle that supersedes this hadith. And he says, you know what that principle is? Because you have to have something heavy to supersede a hadith. This is in Bukhari. He said, the principle that supersedes this hadith is the establishment of Muslim identity. The purpose for our creation, the purpose for our procreation is establishment of Allah's deen on earth. This is it. Allah says this in the Quran, I created you for nothing else than to worship me, to establish my deen on earth. If the only way to get kids to inculcate Islam, to inculcate Islamic communal life in their life, is to bring them around Muslims where they can see communal life, where they can be proud to be Muslim, if that's the only way to get them is in the masjid, then the principle of establishing Muslim identity supersedes this one hadith in this instance. And he said, Mostad looked at me and he said, wow. He says, Bichara, I hate the fact that you're in India because you have to tote the line, the Deobandi line, but if you were somewhere else, you would be a great imam. But he said, here we just can't accept your opinion. I'm sorry, because here we're inundated with Islam. But he said, in America, your opinion is 100% valid. He understood that our purpose on earth is just to establish Muslim identity for ourselves and for our kids. This one aspect, this one principle underlies everything in Sharia. Everything in Sharia is hinging on this one thing. So much so, I heard Mufti Mudassir say this in the Bayan with my own ears. He said this principle of establishment of Muslim identity, listen to what he said. It is so paramount. I'm paraphrasing because he said in Urdu. But he said it's so paramount that if you think in administering discipline, tarbiyah, to a student or your child, if you think that it will push him away, then don't administer punishment. Hold off on the punishment. That's no excuse when you guys do bad, though. I just want to preface that with a qualifier. Hold off on the punishment. If you think that by punishing this kid, he will run away from Islam, then the overwhelming principle that governs our Sharia is that you bring people into Islam, not that you push them away from Islam. And if you think this will push this kid away, it'll turn his heart, it'll make him hate Islam, then don't punish him. He said this is a nusul of tarbiyah, of upbringing. Muslim identity is that powerful. Now, so the issue comes, what is Muslim identity? Muslim identity is different for every other person. What is Muslim identity for me may not be Muslim identity for you. And what do I mean by that? What I mean by that is that we follow the farda'in, we follow the things that we're obligated to follow, we follow the Quran and we follow the Sunnah, but we're not all at the same degree though. We're not. Some of us are younger, some of us are older, some of us are more advanced in Islam than others. Some of us have more societal obligations, communal obligations on us. So based on other factors, you may be positioned differently. You follow what I'm saying? You cannot expect a guy who is an engineer to do tabligh for 40 days, right? And sometimes, you know, I remember this one great alim telling me that he went to some city and gave a khutbah, and he teaches all day. He teaches maktab every day, 6 days a week. And the good brother, he says, there was a good-natured brother, but he told me, he said, Sheikh, you do great works, but there's one aspect missing in your life. And he's like, really, what is that? And he says, you don't do tabligh for 60 days or 40 days. And he's like, mashallah, yeah, I'll try. And he's like, what do I tell this guy? You know, because in his mind, if you don't do tabligh, you're not fulfilling your Muslim identity. That makes you a Muslim. You must do tabligh. I'm not speaking ill of tablighis. I'm just stating an example, right? So you cannot expect an engineer, somebody who's an engineer, you cannot expect an engineer to go out there and give khutbahs every Friday. Unless you want to hear about semiconductors. You know, that is the job of an alim or a hafiz. That's their job. We are positioned differently. So what the definition of our Muslim identity is different for every individual. With just one caveat, that we follow the requirements of the Quran and the Sunnah. With that said, the other thing I want to point out is that, why is it important? We understand that we have to have Muslim identity. Why is it so important? It is not only important for our relationship with Allah, but it is, I mean, I cannot begin to tell you how important it is for our kids. I was sharing a post that I did with Brother Naeem, in which I saw this thing at Falafel Corner at in Fremont, and it was Maghrib time. Brother calls the adhan. Literally, people just stopped doing what they're doing and got up and got in the ranks. I was sitting there, I'm a cook over there, so I was cooking, and you know, the thing about the Bay Area, you have to have like 2 jobs. I'm going to school and I have 2 jobs, because the living here is so expensive, you know, so I work in Falafel Corner too. So I'm sitting there cooking, and I hear the adhan, and I see everybody rush, and Mufti Nawaz was actually leading the prayer, and I thought that was so beautiful. I shared the post with the brother. I literally saw people with their families, right? And every race you can think of, every color, creed you can think of, everybody was there. And the men dropped what they were doing, and they got in the ranks. And what I saw that was so amazing was for the kids. I was looking at the kids. And that's what I pointed out in my post. That, man, what I saw with the kids was, they're looking at their fathers. You know, just stop everything and go over there. And now I'm looking at the ranks also, and there were people, I could tell there were people of different schools of thought, different madhab. I'm looking at him, I go, okay, I know he's from such and such, so he's probably such and such. He's from Pakistan, I know he's Hanafi. And you know, I'm kind of like observation, right? So, but the kids, they're looking at their fathers get in the ranks with people of different backgrounds, people they've never probably even met before. For that little brief moment in that lifetime, right? They left everything behind. Their families, food. Imagine that. A shameless plug for Falafel Corner. Their food is very good, so they left that at the table too. And they made salat. And then when they finished, they came right back to their families. For a kid watching that, I just want you to imagine a kid growing up and watching something like that. What pride would come in his heart. He may never tell you. He may never say it. But you could see it in their eyes. You could see it. It was palpable. You could see it. You could feel it. Like, they were just looking at their kid like eating French fries. You know how they look at TV? That's how they were looking at their fathers. And I thought it was so amazing. I took a picture and I posted it, because I just thought it was so amazing. Seeing those little kids just eating their French fries and just looking at their fathers like, it It was so beautiful. Muslim identity. My time is up?
No, you got
Okay. So anyway, that's why establishing Muslim identity is so significant. Not only for our relationship with Allah, but for the kids. For the kids, because they're the next generation. A community cannot survive without its children. Not just without them physically, but without them intellectually and spiritually engaging Islam, embracing their Muslim identity. We have, if you look at American history, Islam in America, throughout American history, I can cite to you so many, not scores of examples of masajid that no longer exist, of communities that no longer exist, of Muslims who have names, last names, or Muslim names, first name Bill, John, and when you ask them, man, where'd you get this name from? Well, I don't know, my grandfather came from somewhere over there. They're gone. Allah removed them because they didn't hold on to that Muslim identity for themselves and for their kids. It's such an important... I am a living example of what can happen. I was in prison. I was in prison with a guy. His name was John Haddad. He was a big old Mexican guy with tattoos from his neck all the way down. We're from the same gang. We're lifting weights one day. And they called his name Haddad. And I was like, Haddad? Where's his name Haddad? It's like Flaco and Rodriguez and Carlos and Haddad. Why are they calling him Haddad? He gets up. So I'm like, your name is Haddad? Because in prison they always call you by your name and your number. That's what they... Haddad, it was like P02326, something like that. And he got up. So that just piqued my curiosity. And like, where are you from, man? He says, I'm from Sacramento. Like, no, where are you from originally? He says, I'm from Sacramento, man. What do you mean where I'm from? How'd you get that name? He says, oh, I think my father was from somewhere over there. And where was your father from? I don't know. And he's like, the guy was like, his father came back in the 30s. And then he ended up going back to Pakistan. I was like, what was your father's name? He mentioned his father's name. I didn't know him. But once a week, you're allowed a 15-minute phone call. So I made it a point that this week, that 15-minute phone call, I'm going to ask my mom who this person is. And I'm like, hey, who is it? Oh, yeah, he was like one of the elders that came a long time ago and then made some money and went back to Pakistan. Like, I'm over here with his son. She's, oh, yeah, he had a few sons, too. Like, really? He's Mexican, his son. Yeah, the boy's just confused. He ain't Mexican, he's Pakistani. He just don't know any better. And it's like that. I witnessed that. What I read in history about what happened with the Turks and the Syrians in the Midwest, that happened in front of me. That guy had no idea. He's Mexican for all intents and purposes. So my point is that we have to hold on to this Muslim identity. Not just for ourselves, but for our kids. If we want this beautiful masjid to be filled up, I can guarantee you, I don't mean to sound pessimistic, by no means, okay? But I can guarantee you that this will never be filled up with just a bunch of gray beards. It will not. There's a reason why Prophet Muhammad ﷺ chose green, not gray, green, as the color of Islam. This was his favorite color, amongst his favorite colors. All the Muslim flags are green. None of them are gray. Show me one gray Muslim flag. One. Why green? Why green? I remember Maulana Tamim telling us that Khidr in Surah 18, in Surah Qaf, Khidr, when he came and he taught Musa alayhi salam, the name Khidr, I asked Maulana Tamim, why did they name him Khidr, which means green? And he says, why they named him? Because wherever he sat, after he would leave, grass would grow. He gave life to wherever he sat. It brought life. Islam has always been about bringing life. That's why green was our color. When you see green, you know automatically something's alive. Green was always... One of my teachers told me, I had a question for him. I said, Sheikh, what was the age of the Sahaba, the average age of the Sahaba? Because I had a theory that they had to be youth. Because the energy that they brought to the world can only come from the youth. Now, when you're old, you're only thinking about Social Security and IRAs and 401ks. And kids don't think about that. Kids are like, I want to go out there and do stuff. So I had this theory. And he said, that's an interesting question. He said, I've actually studied their biographies at length. Overwhelmingly, they were young. Late teens, early 20s, when they accepted Islam. You name them. Khalid, there were some exceptions, obviously, but the overwhelming majority of them, Khalid bin Walid, Umar radiallahu anhu, and all the main ones, they were in their late teens, early 20s. That's where the energy came from. If there were a bunch of old men, you know, I mean, we're just going to sit there and argue. Now, I told you not to wear your clothes like that. The Imam, I know he made a mistake in the second rakat. I know he did. I'm going to tell them. The youth, they're like, I don't care about that, man. Let's go do something. If we want to preserve our communities, we have to invest in our youth. We must invest in our youth. How do you invest in the youth? Understand what is significant to the needs of the youth. There is nothing more significant to the needs of the youth than establishing Muslim identity. And in establishment of Muslim identity, we just have to understand that there are certain factors, case factors, that we have to take into consideration for the youth. Not all of them. There's no cookie cutter model for this. It would be nice. I wish I could just give you a 10-point plan that this is a cookie cutter model that you can apply to all youth. No, it doesn't work like that. But we, as elders, have to sit down and care about the youth. And I'll leave you with this. In English, there's a rhetorical device called chiasmus. Chiasmus literally means to take the same words, change the order of the words, and have a converse meaning to them. And I'll give you an example of this. People don't care what you know until they know you care. This applies more to youth than to anybody else. Youth do not care about your degrees. They don't care how big of a turban you have, because apparently nowadays the bigger the turban, it means that's how many years you stayed in madrasa. They don't care. They don't care if you're Maulana, Mufti, Sheikh, Qari, Qazi. None of that means anything to them. They don't care what you know. Only thing the youth care about is that you care. You could have a guy who has absolutely no degrees. None. Not even a high school education. Probably drove by a high school, didn't even attend high school. But that guy goes out there and plays basketball with them. Buy some pizza after basketball. In that, he asks him, hey man, you alright, man? Everything alright? Because your game is off today. Something's bothering you. He cares. He cares to take time out of his day to spend it with them. They don't even care what he knows. He may not even have the answers to their questions because he hasn't studied psychology. He may not have a single answer to their question, but they will figure out the answer to their own question just by opening up to him. And why do they open up to him? He cares. It's that simple. We have to start caring. Caring comes not through YouTube. Caring comes not through the internet. Caring comes not through fancy glossy magazines and big banquets and big events. No. Heart to heart. That's where caring comes from. That's what brought Islam to us. It is the only thing that will take Islam to the next generation. Inshallah, with that, I will leave you. I hope I have not said anything to offend anybody. May Allah protect us. And inshallah, I'll open up. Do I have some time for questions?
Yeah, you still have 15 minutes.
Yeah, I always like leaving. This is just my style. Wherever I go, I always like leaving it up for question and answer. I was the keynote speaker at Texas Tech University, right? And after my speech, and I was wearing a pakol, by the way, and they were like, I remember they told me afterwards, like, you know, I think you're the only guy in Lubbock, Texas that ever wore one of them things. And it was so beautiful hearing that in their Texas accent, you know what I mean? So anyway, and I left about 10 minutes with question and answer. And I told them that ahead of time. I'm like, I don't believe in monologue. I believe in dialogue. I believe that we grow when we can communicate. So they were like, yeah, we've never had that request from a keynote speaker, but if that's what you want, fine. So alhamdulillah, that's where I believe. I believe in the dialogue. So I'll open it up for some questions, inshallah. Somebody asked me a question. How about you guys? Ask me a question, man. Give me a sports question.
Yeah, ask me a sports question.
Wow, it's
I know you said you don't have any cookie cutter for the youth program, but do you know any key program that will help to attract the youth to the masjid? Like, you know, something that we could incorporate.
What I've seen that really works, to be honest, is I've seen sports.
Yeah.
Sports works.
Sports works.
Sports work on two levels. One, I mean, when I was a kid, I loved basketball. I've yet to meet a kid that doesn't like basketball. For the record, that's just one. Kids love basketball. Basketball is a cheap game. I mean, you can just literally put up a hoop, and that's it, and give them a ball. But sports work on two levels. You know, one, you have to have that camaraderie, and team sports build that. And second is it allows you to have, more than anything else, after the game and even during the game, it allows you to talk. It allows you to ask them questions. And until kids open up to you, kids live in a separate world, by the way. I just want you guys to know that. I hope this is not a revelation for nobody, but kids live in a bifurcated world. There's a world that they live in that you see. There's a completely different world that you will never have access to. And they like it that way. They will never give you access. Kids are kind of like your wife. I'm just finding this out. They have a different world that does not include you, and not in a bad sense, in an emotional sense. There's certain aspects to people that at an emotional level, I'm sorry, you just don't have access to that yet. It's not going to be permanently closed. They may give you the combination to that emotional side, but you have to earn that. You have to earn that. This is not a lock that you can break and enter with a felony conviction. It is not one of those. I'm sorry. This is a combination that they have to give. It's like a password. They must give you that password. You know, like the FBI found out that Apple is not an easy phone to break into. Like, please give us the password. This is the emotional world. You want to enter the emotional world, you must have that password. That password will only come to you if you're in their company, if you share their interests, and if you're a brother to them, if you're a father figure to them, not an authoritarian. So this is very important to know. Yeah.
So I want to ask you, you said you were pretty young and you were going towards a bad. What now thinking back, what would you think or wish that your parents would have done that you didn't went to that route? You went, you know, I mean, at that time, what do you think? What you can give us in that sense, that what as a kid at that time, doing bad things, what you wish your parents would have done that
Could have
would
prevented
make
that.
a change, or would probably change your, past?
I wish I could talk to them. I wish I could have talked to them. I wish I could have told them that when I'm going to school and I'm being picked on for all the things that I named that I was being picked on, I wish I could talk to them and they could understand. But they've never been to an American school. They had no idea. Don't worry about it. You'll get over it. That was their answer. Because they never had to deal with that. They went to a school in Pakistan. Everybody looked like them. Everybody had the same name, the same culture. They were never the outcast. So These were things that they could never relate to, right? So when I even tried talking to them, it fell on deaf ears. And you know, a lot of times grown-ups have this pseudo-sanctimonious attitude where they think you're just an idiot. And this is wrong. The last thing you want is a kid is opening up to you. You know, he's been holding this stuff in, and he's like, finally, I have to tell somebody or else I'm going to blow up. It's killing me. And you look at him like, with this attitude that, oh, you don't know what you're talking about. Just do your homework. Your grades that you get every 90 days, those only reflect your academic skills, right? And your academic achievements. They have absolutely no bearing on what's going on inside emotionally and psychologically. My parents never understood that. They're like, as long as you're getting good grades, you're doing good. Whatever you're going through, this other, it's like, this is nothing, you know? So I couldn't talk to them. It's not that I didn't try. There was no way to get through to them. I'll say this. I'm a firm believer that Muslims need to have some type of counseling, self-help, some kind of psychologist, professionals that their services are available to the Muslim community in the sense that just somebody we can talk to, right? And that we can kind of open up to. So this is very important. My parents, I couldn't do that with my parents. Yeah, I wish I could have, because it would have prevented not only 21 years in prison, but to be able to go to prison for a life sentence, you have to commit a lot of violent crimes. So it actually would have prevented a lot of people from being hurt. Because there's an old saying, hurt people hurt people. An emotionally disturbed, psychologically disturbed person, a hurt person in that sense, he will lash out and hurt other people. Why? Because he gets desensitized. For me, and I don't say this with any type of joy or pride, but for me to shoot somebody or to stab somebody, it was nothing. I was a gang member. You know? Like, what did you say? Man, you picked on the wrong dude today, buddy. So for me, that was nothing. To get to that point, what got me to that point was all this psychological trauma. So yeah, I wish I could have talked to my parents. But no, they didn't have the answers. That's why I'm saying it's so crucial for us to be involved in the lives of our youth to where they feel comfortable to open up to us and we know enough about their secret life now, their emotional life. And by secret life, I only mean their emotional life. That's all I mean by that. The emotions that they hold from us. That we know enough about them and they're open enough to discuss those with us that we can actually give them some. And I'll answer with this. When you're a father and you have kids, let's say they want to learn about sex at some point, who do you trust to tell them about that? You or Google? I would prefer me. I would prefer that when my kids get to that point in life, that they come to me and like, Dad, I got some questions, man. Be straight up with me. Give me some straight answers. Because if not, I'm going to Google. I don't trust Google. In fact, I was with Fahim. We were coming up over. Google had me going. I was supposed to get off on King Road. Google sent me all the way down on 101. So Google is not always right. If Google can't get me here right, I really don't want to trust Google for my kids. I don't want my kids going to Google to find out about the most important things in their life. I want me. And I definitely don't want their friends at school telling them about, this is how it goes, man. No, I don't trust their friends. Yeah.
I was wondering if you can tell these kids that was not the crime you committed, actually it was the company which got to that 23 years.
That's a very good point.
For them, the company will be very important.
It's a very good point, because I did do a life sentence, but before I actually earned the life sentence, I had a lot of other violent crimes before that. So I went to prison twice. I'm not proud of that. But the second time I went to prison, when I got the life sentence, and I was completely innocent of that crime, actually. Completely innocent. Had nothing to do with that crime. I was with my friends. The only bad thing is they were all gang members. A guy gets beat up. He gets beat up really bad. 181 stitches in the hospital. And I was there. Had nothing to do with the fight. But I had a record, a very violent prison record. I was a gang member, and I just happened to be there, and I wouldn't tell. For that, they gave me 3 strikes, and they gave me a 25 to life sentence for that, even though they knew I didn't commit the crime. And why? Because you're in the company, and there's a law in California, man. I wish they would do something about this stupid law. Aiding and abetting. If you're there, you just have to be there, and by virtue of not doing anything to stop that, you're culpable. The degree of culpability, the only thing that affects the degree of culpability is your prior record. If you have a prior prison record and you're a gang member, guess what? Imagine you're a judge. This guy comes in front of you and he's like, Your Honor, he's actually innocent. He didn't do anything. And the DA gets up and says, yeah, Your Honor, but I want you to look at all the stuff he did for the past so many years, you know? And the judge was like, why did you even get out of prison the first time? Who let you out? We should lock him up. So anyway, very good point. I went to prison the second time with a life sentence, mind you, because of my company. I could not shake those guys. Why couldn't I shake those guys? At that point, man, I had developed an identity for myself that was so far from Islam. It was an identity. I was a gang member. I was comfortable with an identity that I had forged with my own hands. Telling on those guys, I would have lost everything. You know what happens to snitches? Yeah, he's a snitch.
Yeah, I think that's really difficult in this society to have, you know, the people around you, you know, you don't have like you were saying, you know, in Pakistan, everybody is Muslim. You know,
exactly. Here we don't have
and here you don't have that. And those are.
And especially nowadays with 9/11. I remember I was in prison when 9/11 happened. Yeah, they came and locked me up again in solitary confinement. You know, so after 9/11, kids suffered even more. Kids, if you go to school in America, you're surrounded by blacks, whites, Mexicans, Asians. You can't tell me that you don't get picked on. Whenever something happens on the news, you don't think kids watch the news? You don't think their parents tell them? This thing happened in San Bernardino, Paris, whatever, and then Trump. We got this dummy now. Yeah. You don't think kids experience that? You don't think they get picked on? How many of us actually sit down and talk to our kids, you know, and like, hey, you know, son, what's going on in school? Is everything all right? They're not bothering you because of this. You know, I wish I could use some choice words for this guy right now, for Trump. But I'm like, I would ask them, your friends aren't bothering you, are they? You know, at first they're going to tell you, no, Dad, everything's fine. But you keep caring and you keep asking and you keep showing interest, at some point, they'll give you the combination. They'll give you the combination to that lock. At some point, you can be like, yeah, Dad, it does bother me sometimes. Why do I know this? You want to know why I know this? Because for some reason, when I'm talking to these youngsters, whether they're in high school or college, and I go to a lot of colleges too, man, they open up to me like, they see me with all this gray hair and this cap and everything, and they're like, yeah, here comes this old uncle. And then they start talking to me, and then they're like, dude, you're just like one of my friends. Just like one of my homeboys, man. You talk just like one of my homeboys. You know, and then they open up to you like, oh, you understand what I'm going through. Like, oh, yeah, I definitely understand what you're going through. And then they tell you, like, yeah, it's rough, man. It's rough. It's rough because every time something happens, then they call you terrorist, and then they're making stupid little jokes about you, and it hurts. And then you're like, come on, man, stop saying that, you know? Because you know it hurts, but you don't know how to respond to that. And you don't have anybody guiding you on, first of all, just giving your shoulder to cry on. It's like, man, I know what you're going through, man. I went through the same thing. And, you know, this is how I dealt with it. You know, they don't have that. The only way you'll get that is to talk to them. Let them open up to you. But that's important. That's just the first step. Get them to open up. Show some care. And inshallah, after some time, they'll start coming here too. The goal is to get them here, though. That's the goal.
You have a good relationship with your parents afterwards?
Huh?
You had good relationship with your parents afterwards?
I had with my mother. My father passed away while I was still in prison. And I never got to see my dad. Last time I saw my dad was when I was 16, 17 years old. I never saw him again after that. They came to see me one time while I was in prison. The first time they came to see me, a riot breaks out in the visiting room. The visiting room was about this big. You got mothers, kids, wives, and these, California is all about gangs in prison. So these two rival gangs see each other and like, man, is that? You know the story. And man, it's one thing that they're just destroying the place. It's another thing when the prison guards come. And they're like, they're like humongous prison guards with big batons. And they went to work. And imagine an old Pakistani family watching a bunch of black guys in there fighting. And a bunch of big old prison guards look like football players. And my mom was like, we are never coming back here again. And I never saw him again. I didn't see my father pass away while I was in prison, and I didn't see my mother till I got out of prison. In fact, the reason why I got out of prison was because of that story. Because the people that changed the 3 strikes law, when they came to San Quentin and they were asking us questions about our stories, and when they asked me and I started telling them, the lady, she says to me, the first thing she said was, she said, you sound very educated. And for the record, I was using some big old words to impress them. Some big $50 words, right? Big old words. Because I knew they were rich and powerful and I wanted to impress them. I didn't know how rich they were, for the record. I didn't know they were going to change the law, put up so much money that they were going to put a proposition on the ballot and change the law. I didn't know that part. She's like, you sound very educated, and where did you get your education? I told her I got it all in prison, and this, that, and the other, and then she starts asking, where are you from? Pakistan, and oh, does your family come see you? And I'm like, no, my family doesn't come see me, and she said, why is that? And I told her the story about the riot, and she said, well, how long has it been since you've seen my family, your family? I said, oh, it's about 17, 18 years I've not seen my family. And she was like, wow, you must be so lonely. She says this in prison in front of like 200 career criminals, and I was like, be honest with you, I'm not afraid of the loneliness. It's not the loneliness I'm afraid of. So what I'm afraid of is that, my father's already passed away while I was in prison. What I'm afraid of is if I ever get out of prison, if I see my mother again, I'll have to talk to her in English, in the language she didn't teach me. Because I'm forgetting my language. I had not spoken my language in like almost 20 years, man. Can you imagine not speaking your language in like 20 years? To this day, I dream in English. I don't dream in my language. When I go talk to my family in my language, they look at me like, dude, what the heck happened to you? It's like, how could you forget your language? I haven't spoken it in 20 years. So anyway, I was like, I'm afraid if I ever get out of prison and I see my mother again, I'll have to talk to her in a language she didn't teach me, and that will destroy her. Because she'll feel like she lost her son all over again. Because she's going to be like, you're not my son. Why are you not speaking the language that I taught you this language? I brought you into this world and I taught you this language. Why are you speaking to me in English? That affected that lady so much. She went home and told her fiance, she said, I don't care what you do, but you're going to get this guy out of prison. And he put up millions of dollars to change the law. That's how I got out. The power of Allah. Power of Allah. So to answer your question about my relations with my family, mashallah, I have very good relations with my family because I came to a point where the identity that Allah had blessed me with, I embraced that identity, and that other identity that I had forged with my own hands, I let that go. So when they saw their son again, it was a son that they could relate to, a Muslim, a practicing Muslim, you know, not Flacco. So alhamdulillah, that's why my relationship with my family was always hinging on identity. Always. And it is, I think it's the same with all of us. Yeah.
So do you think that the kids of today, the way they are being raised and the environment that they're being raised, is it different than how you have been raised way back when? Or has it become more easier, or is it more difficult, or is it about the same?
In some ways it's become easier, in some ways it's difficult. The environment that I grew up in was all about violence. You know, if you look at the 80s, it was all about gangs and guns. It was a very violent world back then. America was very violent. Kids don't have the same level of violence anymore, but I think it's, in that sense it's better, but I think it's gotten worse in the sense that media, social media specifically, has made it easier for kids to go into that other world of theirs without the parents knowing. So I think they've encrypted that password to such a degree now where you actually need to really, really care about your kids because they can escape from you very easily. They can go into social media. They can explore the world. It's at their fingertips. The entire world is at their fingertips right now. So parents have to be, they have to care even more about their kids. And I'm not talking about being big brother and watching everything that they do. Trust them, guide them, but understand that what they're going through right now, it's not about violence and fights and things like that. They're going through stuff that's more emotional and psychological. So they need to be addressed literally, and I'm not making this up, with kitty gloves. With kitty gloves, more tenderly and more from an emotional and psychological perspective. And kids will open up to you. I know if I'm a perfect stranger, and if they can open up to me in 20 minutes, and you as a parent, they will open up to you definitely. The underlying cause, the underlying factor here is that you have to care. And just one thing else I want to point out, speaking of underlying factors, this is very important. By the time your kids start exhibiting problems, that's just the tip of the iceberg. Don't look at the problem. Do me a favor, never look at the problem. Look at the underlying causes of the problem. If you're looking only at the problem, you're just looking at the tip of the iceberg. There's an entire chunk of ice under the water that you're missing. Always look at, so my kid is staying out late. That is a problem. What is causing that? What are the 50 to 100 reasons that he's staying out late? That's what you need to discover. And if you can cut out those roots, minimize those roots, guess what? He might not stay out late. Or if he does, he'll want to stay out late with you and go to Falafel Corner and eat pizza. Another shameless plug from Falafel Corner. So I'm gonna leave it.